Captain Kira Raylan's heart pounded in her chest as she steered her spacecraft through the unknown regions of deep space. The Orion's Promise, her reliable ship, was on a routine mission to explore uncharted planets in a distant galaxy. Kira, known for her adventurous spirit and unshakable confidence, had spent years training for moments like this. Yet nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to face. A sudden jolt shook the ship, followed by a series of warning alarms blaring in her ears. The hull of the Orion's Promise was damaged by what seemed like an invisible force. The ship's navigation systems went haywire, and Kira struggled to maintain control. With a crash that rattled her bones, the ship plummeted toward a desolate planet below, and Kira braced herself for impact. When she woke, everything was different. The once pristine control room was now in ruins, with debris scattered all around her. The ship had crash-landed in the heart of an alien world. As the dust settled, Kira stumbled out of the wreckage, her senses overwhelmed by the strange atmosphere. The sky was a deep purple, with swirling clouds that flickered like static electricity. Towering trees with dark, glossy leaves loomed over her, their roots twisting like serpents in the ground. Kira adjusted her visor and checked her weapons, hoping to find something familiar in this alien landscape. Her mission had changed in an instant from exploration to survival. But as she scanned the area, something else caught her attention. Movement. From the thick jungle ahead, a figure emerged, tall, powerful, and regal. It was an alien being, unlike anything Kira had ever encountered. The creature was insectoid, with chitinous armor covering its body. Its elongated limbs flexed with a menacing grace, and glowing red eyes locked onto Kira's with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. This was no ordinary alien. This was Queen Vaelthari, the ruler of the Xerath, a powerful and ancient species feared throughout the galaxy for their strength and intelligence. Her insect-like exoskeleton shimmered in the faint light of the distant sun, her every movement a display of authority. Vaelthari's antennae twitched slightly, sensing Kira's presence. Kira's instincts screamed at her to run, but the weight of her situation held her still. She was trapped. The Queen's eyes narrowed, and Kira could see the calculating expression in her alien face. Vaelthari's voice was like a sharp, melodic hiss as she spoke in a language Kira couldn't understand. Yet the tone was clear, threatening. Kira, however, was no stranger to danger. She adjusted her stance, ready to fight if necessary. "I don't want trouble," Kira said, her voice steady but laced with tension. "I'm not here to hurt you." But Queen Vaelthari seemed unmoved. The alien queen had no interest in Kira's words. She was already studying the human, her gaze both curious and predatory. Kira could feel the alien queen sizing her up, as if deciding whether to keep her alive or eliminate her on the spot. Before Kira could react, a flash of movement erupted from the queen's side. Several armed Xerath warriors emerged from the jungle, circling Kira. Despite the odds, Kira remained calm, her mind racing for a way out of this perilous situation. She had to think fast. With no time to waste, Kira realized that survival in this alien world was no longer just about escaping. She would have to outsmart and outmaneuver the queen and her warriors if she wanted to live. The strange planet, its dangers, and its ruler were only the beginning of the nightmare that Kira now found herself thrust into. The queen was not just a ruler, she was a force of nature, and Kira's unexpected encounter with her would change everything. Queen Vaelthari stood before Kira, her glowing red eyes piercing through the dim light of the alien world's eerie sky. The Xerath queen was a formidable being, her insectoid form intimidating and regal. Her long, sharp antennae twitched as she observed the human woman. Kira couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, yet she refused to show any weakness. The warriors surrounding her were silent, their sharp, metallic claws gleaming in the dim light. Kira's mind raced, trying to figure out how she could escape, or at least understand what the queen wanted from her. She didn't expect to survive this encounter, let alone be caught in the strange web of the Xerath queen's complex, alien customs. Vaelthari's voice broke through the silence, its melodic but deadly tone sending a shiver down Kiera's spine. "You are an intriguing specimen, human. Your biology. It's unlike anything I've encountered before," she said, her words both curious and possessive. Kiera tried to keep her composure. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the situation. Vaelthari's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Kiera felt as though she was being dissected, not just by the Queen's gaze, but by her every thought. "You will understand soon enough," the Queen replied cryptically. For the next few hours, Kiera was held captive within the Queen's palace, a towering structure made of black, reflective stone that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The walls were adorned with alien art, depicting Zerath warriors in combat and the Queen herself in various regal poses. Despite the alien surroundings, Kiera remained determined to learn more about the Zerath and how she could use that knowledge to her advantage. However, what she discovered next was far beyond her expectations. Vaelthari explained in fragmented bursts of speech, revealing a strange aspect of the Zerath's biology. The Queen, it turned out, was driven by a biological imperative that no one, not even the most powerful Zerath males, had been able to satisfy. The Queen was a powerful being, one capable of ruling over her entire species, but her greatest struggle was her inability to produce offspring. The Zerath were a species that relied heavily on reproduction to maintain their strength and influence, and yet the Queen had failed in this regard for centuries. The creatures she had mated with, other Zerath males, had been unsuccessful in making her pregnant. The birth of an heir was the only way to secure her power, but it seemed an impossible task. Kiera, a human woman, was something entirely different. When the Queen had first laid eyes on her, a strange reaction had stirred within her. There was something in Kiera's genetic makeup, something unique and powerful that Vaelthari had never encountered before. Without fully understanding why, Vaelthari had selected Kiera for the mating ritual, a ritual that was meant to be the key to her offspring. The Queen was unsure of what would happen, but the need for an heir was far greater than her desire for control. Kiera listened in stunned silence as Vaelthari explained her reasoning. The Queen was furious at the very idea of needing the human male to fulfill her biological imperative, but there was no denying that the strange, unexplained connection between Kiera and Vaelthari had triggered something within her. Kiera felt a mix of emotions swirl within her: fear, confusion, and anger. But she knew one thing for sure: her survival depended on her understanding of the Queen's motives. Vaelthari's frustration was palpable as she paced the chamber, her sharp claws scraping against the stone floor. "You are the answer to my problem, human," the Queen said, her voice cold. "But do not mistake this for anything other than necessity. I will never see you as more than a means to an end." Despite her harsh words, Kiera could feel the truth behind them. The Queen was not just angry, she was desperate. The Queen had never expected this kind of solution, and yet here Kiera was, unknowingly at the center of it all. Kiera realized that she was caught in something much larger than herself, and escape seemed impossible. As much as she wanted to fight back, she knew that to survive, she would need to navigate the complexities of this alien world, and perhaps even form a connection with the one being who could be both her enemy and her unlikely ally. Queen Vaelthari's fury grew with every passing moment. The alien world around her, once an intimidating but orderly place, now seemed to pulse with her frustration. Kiera could feel it, the sharp, oppressive atmosphere. It was as if the Queen's anger was a tangible force that pressed down on everything in its path. The human woman, however, stood her ground, her heart pounding as Vaelthari's eyes bore into her. The Queen's towering figure seemed to dwarf everything else in the room. Her insectoid form, sleek and elegant, now appeared even more menacing as her mind raced. The Queen had never expected such an outcome. In all her centuries of rule, Vaelthari had been accustomed to control, to dominance. But this was something she could not control. I never wanted this, Vaelthari hissed through clenched mandibles, her voice seething with rage. Kiera remained silent, her pulse quickening as she struggled to make sense of the situation. The Queen's anger was clear, but there was something else too, something far more confusing. Beneath the fury was a flicker of uncertainty, of vulnerability. Kiera knew she was walking a dangerous line, but she couldn't afford to show fear. "You've done the impossible, human," the Queen continued, her tone dark. "You've made me pregnant. Do you realize what that means?" Kiera's mind raced. She had heard the Queen's explanation before, but it was different now. The reality of the situation hit her hard. Queen Vaelthari, the ruler of the Xerath, a species that had never once failed in their ability to reproduce, was now carrying her child. Kiera had heard rumors of the Queen's desperation for an heir, but she had never imagined it would come to this. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was the cause of the Queen's turmoil. The Queen's sharp claws clicked on the stone floor as she paced back and forth. Her eyes flared, glowing red as they locked onto Kiera. "You are an anomaly," Vaelthari spat, her voice thick with disbelief. "I do not understand how your human biology has caused this. How have you done what no other Xerath male could?" The Queen's tone was filled with both awe and venom, and Kiera could feel the weight of her words. This was no ordinary pregnancy. It was an event that defied everything Vaelthari had known. Kiera had never intended to be a part of any of this. She hadn't come to this alien world willingly. She had crash-landed, been captured, and thrust into a situation she had no control over. Yet here she was, standing before the powerful Queen, whose future now depended on her. Kiera's heart raced with the realization that her life, and now the life of a child she had never asked for, was tied to Vaelthari's survival. The Queen's eyes softened for a moment, and for a brief second, Kiera thought she saw something else behind the rage. A deep, hidden fear. "You do not understand, human," Vaelthari whispered, almost to herself. "If I do not carry an heir, my rule will crumble. My enemies will overthrow me. I have fought for centuries to maintain my power, and now I find myself weak." The Queen's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her internal struggle. She had ruled with strength, with an iron will, but now that strength was slipping away. And Kiera was the key to it all. Kiera's mind was in turmoil. She had been thrust into this situation against her will, yet it seemed she was the only one who could help the Queen. The complexity of their relationship was only deepening. She didn't know whether to feel sympathy for Vaelthari or fear her more than ever. But one thing was clear: she couldn't escape. Not yet. There was no going back. The consequences of this strange, unexpected bond were just beginning to unfold, and Kiera knew that her role in this alien world was far from over. Vaelthari paused in her pacing, her antennae twitching in frustration. "I need you," the Queen said in a tone that was almost reluctant. "You have done what no one else could. You are my only chance at securing my throne." Kiera stared back at her, unsure of what to say. What could she say? She had never asked for any of this. But as Vaelthari's gaze fixed on her, Kiera realized one undeniable truth. This was far from over, and the strange, unexpected consequences of their encounter had only just begun. Kiera's mind was racing as she sat alone in the cold, dim chamber of the Xerath palace. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she forced herself to breathe deeply and focus. The alien world outside was foreign and hostile, and the Queen's demands were growing more intense with every passing moment. Yet Kiera had always prided herself on her ability to think on her feet, to find solutions when everything seemed impossible. This was no different. Despite the seemingly insurmountable odds, she refused to let herself be consumed by fear. She wasn't going to stay in the Queen's grasp forever. She had a plan, or at least she would find one. The walls around her were made of the same dark, reflective stone that shimmered with a faint, eerie glow. There was little to comfort her in this alien environment, but Kiera's sharp mind was always her greatest asset. She had spent her life in the field, surviving in places far worse than this. Even though Vaelthari, the Seraphis queen, had made it clear that Kira was meant to be more than just a prisoner, Kira couldn't allow herself to become complacent. The queen's power was vast, but Kira knew one thing for sure: no one, not even Vaelthari, was invincible. It was then that Kira had a sudden realization. The queen had underestimated her. Vaelthari had made the mistake of thinking that Kira was just a helpless human, someone she could manipulate without resistance. But Kira was no ordinary human, and the more she thought about it, the more she saw cracks in the queen's strategy. Kira had been observing the palace and its layout, the patterns of the guards, the routines of the servants. The queen's palace, as grand and imposing as it was, had its vulnerabilities. Kira had noticed something crucial during her earlier interactions with the Seraphis servants. There were a few who seemed less hostile, more neutral. They were quiet, keeping to the shadows, but Kira could see the faint signs of dissent in their eyes. These servants were afraid, yes, but they also seemed to resent the queen's rule. If she could gain their trust, perhaps she could use them to her advantage. The problem was, Kira had to be careful. Vaelthari's eyes were everywhere, and any sign of disloyalty would be met with severe punishment. But Kira had to take the risk. She was out of options. The following day, Kira made her move. She began speaking to the servants when no one was looking, quietly, in hushed tones. She didn't trust them completely, but she had learned that the simplest gestures could often reveal the most. Slowly, she built rapport, using small acts of kindness to show that she wasn't like the queen. She was an outsider, just as they were, trapped in a system they couldn't control. Kira's sharp mind was at work, piecing together what she knew about the palace, about Vaelthari's weaknesses. It wasn't long before one of the servants, a young Seraphis female named Nelaris, approached Kira. Nelaris's expression was wary, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "You're different," Nelaris whispered, glancing around to make sure they weren't being watched. "The queen is not what she seems. If you help us, we may be able to help you." Kira's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the opening she needed. She nodded slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be here," she said, keeping her tone steady. "I don't want to hurt anyone, but I need to get out of here. Can you help me?" Nelaris hesitated, but then her face softened. "I can," she said quietly, "but you must be careful. The queen is watching everything. No one is safe here, not even her closest allies." Kira's eyes narrowed. The queen's reign of fear was more widespread than she had imagined. Still, this was the first real opportunity she'd had to break free. She couldn't waste it. "I'm not going to let her control me," Kira said firmly. Nelaris nodded, the corners of her lips twitching into a faint smile. "Then we'll have to be smart about it. There's a way out, but we'll need more help. Trust me, Captain Raylan, this will take more than just you." As Kira listened, a sense of hope began to bloom inside her. She had found a crack in the queen's fortress. There was still much to do, but now, for the first time since her crash landing on this alien world, Kira felt the spark of possibility. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to escape. And when she did, she would make sure the queen knew that humans were not to be underestimated. Kira couldn't afford to waste any time. With Nelaris's quiet promise of help, she felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her crash landing. The queen's palace was a labyrinth, its dark stone walls hiding countless dangers. But it also had its secrets, weak points, cracks in the fortress that could be exploited. Kira had been watching, listening, and now, with Nelaris's help, she was finally ready to make her move. The time for passive observation was over. Over the next few days, Kira worked in quiet collaboration with Nelaris and a few other servants who had begun to show interest in the human's plight. The risk of discovery was always looming, but the tension only fueled Kira's determination. She had learned quickly that the queen's attention was divided. She was focused on the unborn heir, her future, and the political turmoil threatening her rule. Vaelthari's desperation was her weakness. While the queen obsessed over her strange pregnancy and its implications, she left her palace unguarded in certain areas, assuming no one would dare challenge her. But Kiera had been trained to think like a strategist, to look for any edge she could get. Nalaris and the others helped her understand the palace's layout, where the guards were posted, when the best time to move was, and where the secret passages were hidden. These passages were meant for the queen's most trusted warriors, and few knew of their existence. Kiera's mind was already racing through the possibilities, calculating the risks, and weighing the outcomes. The escape plan was simple but dangerous. Kiera would need to get out of the palace, reach the landing bay where her damaged ship was located, and then somehow repair it enough to leave the planet. But that was only the first part of the plan. The second part, the most crucial part, was evading Vaelthari's wrath. If the queen discovered her escape, Kiera knew she would never survive. The night before the escape, Kiera stood in her small chamber, staring out through a small window at the distant stars. The planet she was on was beautiful in its own way. Dark forests, glowing lakes, and a sky that seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. But Kiera couldn't afford to be distracted by the beauty of it. There was nothing here for her. She was an outsider, a prisoner, and the longer she stayed, the more dangerous it became. She had to get back to her world, back to her ship, back to the only place where she truly belonged. Nalaris appeared in the doorway, her voice barely a whisper. "It's time." Kiera nodded, her heart thumping in her chest. She could hear the sound of her pulse in her ears. This was the moment of truth. There was no turning back now. She followed Nalaris down the dark corridors, the air thick with tension. Every step she took felt like a heartbeat echoing through the palace, as if the walls themselves were watching her, waiting for her to slip up. The first part of the plan went smoothly. They'd reached the hidden passage with no issues, moving swiftly through the narrow, dimly lit tunnels. The guards had been distracted, and for once, luck seemed to be on Kiera's side. But as they reached the final stretch, where they would emerge into the landing bay, Kiera's breath caught in her throat. They were so close, just one final obstacle. As they moved into the open area of the landing bay, the sight of her damaged ship was both a relief and a reminder of how much work was still needed to get it airborne. But just as Kiera started to make her way toward the ship, a loud screech echoed through the hall. A group of Xerath warriors, led by none other than Queen Vaelthari, emerged from the shadows. Kiera's heart skipped a beat. The queen's cold, calculating eyes locked onto her with fury. "You thought you could escape me, human." Vaelthari's voice rang through the bay like a command. "You are mine. You will never leave here." Kiera's mind raced. The queen had figured it out. The plan was compromised, but it wasn't over yet. She quickly turned to Nalaris, her voice low but urgent. "Get to the ship. I'll handle her." Nalaris hesitated, her face filled with fear. "You're crazy. You won't survive." Kiera's eyes hardened. "I don't have a choice." She turned to face Vaelthari, bracing herself for the confrontation she had been trying to avoid. It was time to make her stand. Vaelthari was powerful, but Kiera was no stranger to danger. The stakes had never been higher. If she wanted to leave this alien world, she would have to fight for it. And she wasn't about to give up now. Kiera's heart pounded as Vaelthari's piercing eyes bore into her, the queen's towering figure radiating authority. The tension in the air was so thick that Kiera could almost taste it. The queen's warriors, with their sharp, gleaming claws, stood at attention behind Vaelthari, ready to strike at the first sign of rebellion. Kiera's mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to run. But there was no time for that. She couldn't afford to be caught again. She had one chance, and if she hesitated for even a second, it would be over. "Leave now, human." Vaelthari's voice echoed in the landing bay, her words dripping with venom. "This is your last chance. I will not let you escape." The queen's mandibles twitched in anger, and the air around her seemed to pulse with power. Kira could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear that she might lose everything. Vaelthari's arrogance had always been her strength, but now it was clear that her grip on control was slipping. Kira swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. She wasn't about to let Vaelthari's threats shake her resolve. With every fiber of her being, she knew she had to fight. "I'm not going back to your prison, Vaelthari," Kira said firmly, her voice steady despite the terror bubbling inside her. "You can't control me, and you won't break me. I'm leaving this place, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." Vaelthari's eyes narrowed, her antennae flicking in irritation. "You think you can defy me? You think your pathetic human strength can match mine?" The Queen's voice was low, almost mocking, as she took a step forward. Kira could feel the weight of Vaelthari's power closing in, but she didn't back down. She wasn't going to show any fear. The Queen's warriors moved to surround Kira, their movements swift and precise. But Kira was ready. She had trained her whole life for moments like this, when everything was on the line. She knew she didn't have the raw power of a Xerath warrior, but she had something more valuable: her mind, her quick thinking, and her ability to adapt. In a flash, Kira reached for the weapons cache she had noticed earlier, a small hidden compartment near the ship's docking port. It wasn't much, but it would give her the advantage she needed. Grabbing a small energy pistol, Kira aimed it at the nearest Xerath warrior, her finger tightening on the trigger. The blast sent the warrior stumbling back, its body crackling with energy. The other warriors hesitated for just a moment, caught off guard by Kira's sudden move. That was all the time she needed. Kira sprinted toward the ship, her breath coming in quick bursts. Behind her, she could hear Vaelthari's enraged roar, the Queen's fury echoing through the landing bay. The Queen wasn't used to being defied, and she was going to make Kira pay for it. But Kira couldn't afford to stop. She had a goal, and she was so close. As she neared the ship, Kira could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, growing louder. Vaelthari wasn't going to let her get away that easily. The Queen was fast, her insectoid legs propelling her forward with terrifying speed. Kira's heart raced as she dove into the ship's entrance, slamming the door shut just as Vaelthari reached it. The Queen let out a screech of fury, her claws scraping against the metal as she tried to force her way inside. Kira scrambled to the controls, her fingers moving quickly as she tried to power up the ship. The ship's systems flickered to life, but Kira knew it wouldn't be long before the Queen broke through. "Come on, come on," Kira muttered under her breath as she worked frantically to get the engine started. She could hear Vaelthari's snarls growing louder, the Queen's rage shaking the very walls of the ship. But finally, with a loud roar, the engines powered up, and the ship jolted into motion. Kira grinned with a mix of relief and defiance as the ship shot up into the air, leaving the Queen's palace far behind. She had done it. She had escaped. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the rush of victory, but the truth was clear. The battle wasn't over. Vaelthari would come after her, and Kira knew the Queen wouldn't stop until she had reclaimed what she saw as hers. But for now, Kira had won, and that was enough to give her the hope she needed to keep fighting. Kira's heart still raced as the ship's engines hummed, carrying her farther from the Xerath planet with every passing second. She glanced over her shoulder at the fading lights of the palace, her chest tight with a mix of relief and worry. Her hands gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white. She had escaped, yes, but she wasn't fooling herself. Vaelthari would not let her go so easily. The Queen's rage was still fresh in Kira's mind, and she knew that Vaelthari's power stretched far beyond the borders of her homeworld. As the ship broke through the atmosphere and entered the cold expanse of space, Kira allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. The stars stretched out before her, distant and cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the Queen's anger that still burned in her thoughts. But there was no time to rest. The escape had been only the beginning. Kira quickly adjusted the ship's course, setting a course for the nearest neutral spaceport, a place where she could lie low and plan her next move. But as she worked, A chill ran down her spine. She could feel it. She wasn't alone. A sudden alarm blared through the ship, a sharp, insistent sound that made Kiara's blood run cold. The sensors showed something large and fast closing in on her position. Her eyes widened in realization. Vaelthari was coming after her. Kiara's fingers flew over the controls, trying to outmaneuver the oncoming threat. The Xerath Queen's ship was designed for speed and agility, and Kiara had no doubt that Vaelthari's vessel was already on its way. The Queen wouldn't rest until Kiara was back in her grasp. As the alarms continued to wail, Kiara's heart skipped a beat. There was no escape. Not yet. With no time to think, Kiara engaged the ship's thrusters, sending it into a sharp turn. The ship's interior rattled as it responded to her frantic commands, but she knew it wouldn't be enough to outrun the Xerath ship. She had to come up with a plan, and fast. Her mind raced as she scanned the space ahead, searching for any advantage she could use. She remembered the asteroid field just beyond the planet's orbit. It was dense, a deadly maze of rocks and debris that had long been avoided by travelers. It was risky, but it was her only chance. If she could make it through the field, the Xerath ship would be forced to follow her in, giving her the opportunity to lose them in the chaos. Without hesitation, Kiara pulled the ship into a sharp dive, steering it toward the asteroid field. The ship lurched and groaned as it sped through space, its engines screaming in protest. The sensors screamed at her, warning her of the dangers ahead, but Kiara didn't slow down. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. As she flew into the asteroid field, the chaos of flying through the sharp, jagged rocks was intense. Kiara's hands worked the controls as if they were an extension of her own body, guiding the ship between the obstacles with precision. The ship shook violently as it skimmed close to the massive boulders, but Kiara kept her focus, her eyes scanning the path ahead. Behind her, Vaelthari's ship wasn't far behind. Kiara could almost feel the Queen's presence, a force of pure rage driving the ship forward. Every time Kiara swerved to avoid an asteroid, the Queen's ship mimicked her movements, closing the gap between them. Kiara's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't keep this up forever. But then, just as she thought she might lose control, she spotted an opening, a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. It was a long shot, but if she could make it, she might finally shake Vaelthari off her tail. With a deep breath, Kiara gunned the engines and sent the ship hurtling toward the gap. The ship screeched as it squeezed through the narrow space, the metal of the ship barely grazing the rocks. Kiara's pulse raced, but she didn't dare look back. She had to keep her eyes on the path ahead. When she finally emerged on the other side, she glanced behind her. Vaelthari's ship had followed, but it was farther back now, slowed by the chaos of the asteroid field. Kiara's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed the ship forward, using every ounce of her focus to stay ahead of the Queen. She could still hear the distant sound of the other ship's engines, but it was faint now. She had gained precious time. For now, she was free. But Kiara knew this wouldn't last. Vaelthari wouldn't give up. The Queen was relentless, and Kiara had only delayed the inevitable. Still, in that moment, Kiara allowed herself a small smile. She had outsmarted the Queen once, and she would do it again. Kiara's eyes were fixed on the vast emptiness of space, the stars stretching endlessly before her. She had taken a deep breath when she realized she had finally outrun Vaelthari, at least for now. The escape through the asteroid field had been her best move, but it wasn't over. The Queen would eventually find her again. Kiara wasn't naive enough to think she had gotten away scot-free, but for now, she had time. Time to plan. Time to think. She needed help. The Xerath were a powerful, relentless species, and she couldn't keep running forever. There had to be someone, somewhere, who could assist her in taking down Vaelthari once and for all. Kiara's fingers moved over the controls again, her mind turning with ideas, trying to calculate her next move. It was then that the communications console beeped, an incoming message. Kiara froze. She hadn't expected anyone to be out here, certainly not anyone she knew. Her eyes darted to the screen as the message flickered to life. The face that appeared was not one she had ever seen before. The figure on the screen was a human. No, not quite human, but close enough. His features were sharp and angular, with a confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had a military air about him, his uniform sleek and well-maintained. The nameplate on his uniform read Captain Adrian Voss. "Kira Solace," the man said, his voice deep and steady, laced with a hint of curiosity. "I've been keeping an eye on you." Kira's heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? How did he know she was even alive? There was no time to ask the questions that instantly flooded her mind. She needed answers. "Who are you?" Kira asked, trying to steady her voice. "How do you know me?" Captain Voss smiled again, though his gaze never wavered. "I've been tracking the movements of Vaelthari's forces for a while now. We've been watching the Queen's rise to power from the shadows, and we've noticed a disturbance. A certain human has caused quite a stir in her palace. I assume that's you." Kira's mind raced. She hadn't expected anyone, let alone another human, to be out here in the depths of Zerent space. Her fingers hovered over the controls, preparing to cut the connection if it turned out to be some kind of trap. But something in the captain's eyes told her he was telling the truth. "I don't have time for games," Kira said, her voice sharp. "What do you want from me?" Voss's expression softened, as if he had expected her skepticism. "I'm offering you an alliance. I have a ship, a much faster, stealthier one than Vaelthari's. I've been in this fight long enough to know when to ally with someone who shares the same enemy. Vaelthari has become a threat to more than just you and me. She's a threat to the entire galaxy." Kira hesitated. Her instincts told her to trust him, but her experiences with the Zereth Queen had taught her not to trust anyone easily. Still, she had little choice. She needed help, and Captain Voss seemed to have the resources and knowledge she needed to stay one step ahead. "Why should I trust you?" Kira asked, her voice guarded. Voss's smile faded as he leaned forward. "Because I want the same thing you do, to see Vaelthari brought down. And because you've already proven you can survive in this mess. You've survived the Queen's wrath. You've escaped when most would have failed. That makes you an ally worth having." Kira thought for a long moment, weighing her options. She didn't have the luxury of time, and she couldn't keep running forever. If she was going to bring down Vaelthari, she would need allies, and the captain's offer was the best one she had gotten. "All right," Kira said finally, her voice steady. "What's the plan?" Voss's eyes sparkled with approval. "Good. We'll rendezvous at the outer rim. I'll send coordinates. Once we meet up, we'll discuss our next move. But trust me, together, we can bring down Vaelthari and her empire." Kira nodded, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. For the first time since her escape, she felt like she might have a chance. She wasn't alone anymore. With Captain Voss by her side, she had a real shot at stopping Vaelthari for good. As the transmission ended, Kira set the coordinates Voss had sent her and turned her ship toward the outer rim. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of optimism. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. And now she had an ally who was just as determined to see it through. Kira's hands trembled slightly as she guided her ship through the vast, empty expanse of space toward the rendezvous point. Captain Voss's words echoed in her mind. Together, we can bring down Vaelthari and her empire. The promise of help had given Kira a new sense of determination. She wasn't alone anymore, and with the captain's resources, she had a real shot at taking the Queen down once and for all. As she approached the outer rim, Kira's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced with thoughts of what was ahead. Vaelthari was still out there, still hunting her down, and every moment they spent in this treacherous space was one more moment the Queen could use to get closer. Kira couldn't afford to make a mistake. She had to stay sharp, stay focused. The stars ahead began to blur as Kira's ship entered a dense asteroid belt. She narrowed her eyes, keeping a close watch on the sensors. A slight shift in trajectory, a momentary distraction, could send her straight into one of the massive rocks that littered the field. But just ahead, Kara saw the glint of another ship, a sleek, dark vessel, expertly camouflaged against the black backdrop of space. The ship's signal came through, and Kara recognized the unmistakable pattern of Captain Voss's communication. He was here. Kara quickly adjusted her course, guiding her ship toward his position. The closer she got, the more her anxiety grew. She could feel the weight of what was coming. This was it, the moment where everything would be decided. When Kara's ship docked with Voss's, she took a deep breath before stepping into the airlock. As the door hissed open, she was met by the captain himself, standing tall and confident as always, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. "We've only got one shot at this," Captain Voss said, his voice low and serious. "Vaelthari won't hesitate to destroy us if she gets the chance, but we have an advantage. Her forces are spread thin, trying to hunt you down. If we strike now, while she's distracted, we can catch her off guard." Kara nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it." Voss led her through the ship, where his crew was already preparing for the assault. Kara couldn't help but notice the professionalism in the way they moved, the quiet intensity that filled the room. These weren't just soldiers, they were a team ready to fight. And they had one goal in mind: Vaelthari's downfall. Soon, they were aboard the ship's main bridge, and Kara saw the layout of their plan. A direct assault on Vaelthari's flagship. The Queen would be caught in the heart of her empire, her forces divided, with little time to react. The captain had made sure to leave nothing to chance. "We hit hard and fast," Voss explained. "We won't give her a chance to regroup. You'll be with me on the front lines, Kara. We'll need your skills." Kara's pulse quickened at the thought of being in the thick of it. This wasn't going to be a simple mission. It was a fight to the death, and the stakes couldn't be higher. She had already lost so much: her freedom, her safety. But this was the moment to finally reclaim everything. As they approached Vaelthari's flagship, the sensors lit up, signaling the Queen's ship in range. Kara took a deep breath, checking her weapons, making sure everything was in place. The time for doubt was over. They had come too far. "We move now," Voss commanded, his voice firm. The ship surged forward, cutting through the void like a blade. The battle was about to begin. Kara felt the adrenaline surge through her as they entered the enemy's territory. The first shots fired from both sides. Explosions rocked the ship as the battle unfolded in full force. But Kara didn't hesitate. She fought with everything she had. Every skill, every ounce of determination. In the chaos of the fight, Kara finally found herself face to face with Vaelthari. The Queen's eyes burned with fury as she looked down at Kara, the hatred evident in every movement. But Kara stood her ground, the fire in her own eyes matching the Queen's. This was it, the final confrontation. Kara had faced so much, but this moment would define everything. With a swift move, she closed the distance, ready to end it once and for all. Vaelthari was no longer untouchable. She would fall. And Kara would be the one to make sure of it. As the battle raged around them, Kara and Vaelthari clashed, their strength and fury a reflection of the war they had waged. But in the end, it was Kara who emerged victorious. The Queen's reign had ended, and the galaxy was finally free. Kara's breath came in heavy gasps as she stood over the fallen Queen, a sense of finality settling over her. The battle was over. The war was won. And Kara Solis, the human who had defied a queen, had emerged victorious.